I wanted to have a chat to you about strengths.
I think it's quite straightforward. We live in a world that is absolutely fixated on where we're weak or deficient. That expression, deficient, focused, really resonates, I think, with both of us. From our first days in education, it seems that our educators, our managers, as we grow up, as we reach adulthood, they feel that their primary responsibility is to highlight our weaknesses and where we're at risk.
So it goes way back beyond that, right? So, I mean, we're designed that way for a reason. Like, I find myself doing that all the time. I have to hold myself back from nitpicking, doing all the little, now hang on a second now. What about? So, we are designed that way. Like, it's in our DNA. It's how we were designed to survive. So there's a reason why we are this way. I think that the key point to get across here is that it doesn't serve us well in this world that we're in, this modern world.
It's like an appendix. An appendix was needed when we were eating grass and 2,000 years ago. That if we were not all the time aware of the threats and the risks, absolutely, we were dead. But now, like that appendix, it's not serving us this absolutely hyper focus on where we're weak. So absolutely, it's in our DNA, but it's as useful as an appendix today.
Yeah.
Actually, it's much more destructive, because apart from the odd time an appendix will decide to rumble and at worst burst, the strengths, our weaknesses are holding us back every single day.
What does it mean to be strength focused?
To have clarity and a real focus on where we're naturally strong, where we have the greatest potential for greatness. That's what I kind of see strengths as. Rather than being a natural ability we're born with, it's where we have the greatest potential for development.
For me, strengths is a tool. It's a way for us to really examine where we're great and focus on that, and not focus constantly on fixing what we're not good at. So back to your point about the appraisal and the school, like, we're always focused on, and I love, you always give this example of the grinds or extra tuition. So if your kid, which and I have to go hand on heart because my kid is getting grinds right now in something he's not very good at.
But you've no choice in the matter.
You've no choice in the matter, indeed. Yeah. But there is that thing where we focus our attention on just getting to a level of normal or functioning on things that we're not good at, and the amount of energy that saps from us. I think that's key for me. And the other piece is so that we're actually focusing on where we're strong rather than just fixing where we're weak. And then the other piece is, I suppose, the next iteration of strengths is like how that works in a team and what that means for a team and what it means for partnerships like you and I, and where your strengths and my strengths work together, and how that creates an incredible partnership for you and I, and an incredible experience to work together. But it also creates an incredible atmosphere and environment for our clients and colleagues, because sure, we're great crack to work with. And not because we agree all the time, even though you're going, yeah, but actually because we disagree, but we understand, we understand each other's strengths. So when you're doing this deep line of questioning where I am going, where's she going with this? I know you're going somewhere brilliant with it. And so, if I feel it's not going anywhere, that's where my strength kicks in, and pull it back to, okay, so what? What happens now? What do we do now? What do we do about it? How do we make this into something that's actionable and actually is going to create an impact? So I think that for me, well, that's the bit I love about strengths, but I also, on an individual level, I think it is about identifying and using it as a tool I think the other thing for me about strengths is it's not the be all and end all. It is the start of a conversation, or it's the start of a process where you consider what's important to you, where you get your energy from, what you love to do. But it's not this is you, therefore you can't do anything outside of that.
Yes, exactly. So it isn't about boxing anyone in. It's about shining a light on all the opportunities people have.
Yeah.
That's what I really like about how they differentiate talent and strength. So a talent is something that hasn't been developed. And it's about, what I would love with our strengths is to change in organizations, move the focus away from bringing everyone to an acceptable average and embracing spikiness.
What do you mean by spikiness, Margaret? Explain.
Spikiness is accepting that Michelle is absolutely incredible in this area. She's very weak in this other area, but that doesn't matter, because we're going to give Michelle as many opportunities as possible in this area that she's incredible. And that's something that actually takes bravery, because we feel we have to have us all at an acceptable average. There was a book I was reading recently, can't remember what it was, it might have been Atomic Strengths, and it was about, he was talking about Michael Phelps, the swimmer, and then some marathon runner, and you know how both of them were just the most off the charts in terms of talent. But yet, if you got them to move sports, switch sports, that they'd still be very talented athletes heading in, but there's no way they could ever excel, because one of them is made for marathons, is made these long endurance, and Michael Phelps is for this quick sprint up at incredible speed. But this is what we do. We actually force our colleagues, our children, to be that average.
Yeah.
It's like we're afraid to allow them, and it's not about being exceptional. It's not about being exceptional. It's just about taking that step, allowing yourself be comfortable with not being super at everything.
I think what you said there, I was coming up with this great concept, and then you said, no, it's not about exceptional. But I actually think that that in one way it's not about acceptable average. Strengths is about exceptional difference.
True. Now, the reason I'm saying it's not about being exceptional, this is my mother thing coming out. I always had such a fear of having exceptional children that I think there's nothing as lovely as average, because the world is tough. And I always thought, my God, what if there were like this champion footballer and they'd have to go to England and it would just be horrendous. So to me, average is so lovely, but that's just my own fucked upness. Don't want my children to be exceptional, but you can only be average if you are focusing on not your weaknesses, but your lesser strengths, that to be exceptional and to really succeed, you have to be aware of where your potential is, and to invest in that. It's not an accident. It has to be intentional.
Yeah. How do you start to become intentional about that?
So there are some tools available. One of them is Gallup Strengths. Using a scientific tool like that is one way, and it's kind of an easy in to, it will give you this information. These are the areas that you should work in. But
let's talk about the process around building a set of superpowers. It doesn't have to be exhaustive, but how do you go about building a set of superpowers?
Individually or team?
Individually to start with. So, you've bought into this, you understand why, but at the same time, you're in your role, you're looking at the people around you, you're going into your, annual review, your manager tells you exactly where you should be improving, what you need to work on. A little bit of focus on where you did really well, but probably not a huge amount. And certainly not forensically analyzing where you're brilliant. So how do you, as an individual, either for your own benefit and then potentially the team and the organization around you, but for your own benefit first off, how do you start to look at those superpowers? How do you start to build them? How do you start to recognize them even? Like, we're so conditioned to look at our failings or what we need to improve on, what we need to fix.
I think, as you said there, this intentionally analyzing what are my successes, and to get clear, because this is an area that I would say absolutely over document, be very descriptive, but firstly look back on what have been your greatest successes. So if somebody asked that of me now, the first thing that comes to mind is I gave up smoking. And then what was it? What was at play? Who were the people supporting you? What do you think you tapped into in yourself? Why is this something that you're incredibly proud of? I think that by doing this exercise, and even better if you have somebody, an accountability partner with you to do it with you, or better again, a coach to do it with you, but to start building up that data bank of your success patterns, your success.
I think something that where I would start with this is to take that sheet of paper and try and write 10 things you're good at. Maybe even get to 20, right? 10 things you're good at, just to start, before you even get into those experiences, start to look at that. I'd also, and you said this to me when I started working with you, and it was such a powerful thing, and I didn't get round. I think you might have said go to 3 friends, but I went to 2 friends and I asked them, what is it I'm good at? Like, what do you think I'm good at? Or, asking somebody, you give me 3 words that would explain, or that would define me or what I'm good at. And I think that's a really powerful thing, because some of the things that you take for granted that you're good at, it just comes naturally to you. You literally don't even see it as a strength. You see it as it's just something that you do. It's just part of you. And so I think another step to take when you've created that list of 10 is to ask a friend, a colleague, and maybe a family member, 3 different types of people, how they describe you or what they think you're really good at, and take that and see if it aligns. It starts that process of considering things that you may not have seen in the past.
Yeah.
Talk to me about appreciative inquiry. What is it? What is it anyway? And why does it matter? And who gives a crap?
Strengths and appreciative inquiry, they are so aligned. So when you bring the 2 of these in to your way of working, your methodology, they strengthen each other. So appreciative inquiry is a strategic tool. Normally, when a company is making decisions about the future, or an organization, you're making decisions. So you bring all your people together, as in the leadership, you bring your leadership together, and there's quite often, even in the largest organizations, that strategy is developed by using the SWOT model. So you have to be able to plan ahead, you have to be really clear. What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? What are our opportunities? And what are our threats? And human nature being human nature, that probably 80 to 90% of that energy expended in the process will be on the cleverest boy in the class identifying every weakness and every threat. And if you are blind to any of those threats, you're considered naive, you are you're just not at the races. You don't understand it. What appreciative inquiry would argue is that in this new way of approaching planning and strategy is that the more focus that we can place on what's working well, that it's so much more productive in terms of how people work together and in terms of outcomes. Appreciative inquiry argues that the questions we ask are so powerful, and that if we frame a question to surface a weakness or a strength, that what it does is it takes everyone down rabbit holes, and it's all about what's wrong and what the risks are. But if you frame a question, a generative question, I think is how they describe it, that is seeks to generate a positive response, that organizations, teams have much, much more positive outcomes. That by asking the question, the simple question, but what's going well here? What's going right? It literally shifts mindsets, that question, turning those questions on their head and saying, okay, absolutely, there are threats, there are weaknesses, but first, let's get really clear on what's working well here and what are the opportunities. And what it does is it takes all that energy and all that fear about the threats, and it builds enthusiasm and energy and teams.
Yeah. And I think, you know what, the magic piece for me in all of this is, it's not just, you know, it's that piece. And then on top of that is, you know, one of the pushbacks when we are working around strengths and appreciative inquiry, one of the pushbacks we always get at a certain point is, well, when are we, like, we can't just ignore what's wrong with us. And absolutely you don't. And I think this is so important to do, that this is not about all sunshine and rainbows and we're always marvelous. It's about how we approach what's holding us back, what's stopping us from being at our best, or what's stopping us from world-class performance. And when those pieces are identified, rather than going down those rabbit holes that you were saying, and literally we could be talking till next week about what's wrong, we're actually always, with appreciative inquiry, we're always looking to flip it. So what do we do about it? How do we change it? How do we make sure that's not an issue anymore? It doesn't allow that focus on what's weak and what's threatening us, but it certainly provides that framework to have that conversation in a really constructive way and ensure that you're managing the weaknesses and the threats, but putting most of your focus on where you're brilliant. And it's in where you're brilliant and where you can perform at your best. That's where you can find real competitive advantage. It's where you can find real profitability. It's where you can find real productivity. Like, that's what it's about. It's about creating that energy to be brilliant 90% of the time. What's that?
Real engagement.
Real engagement. But even just your own individual energy or the energy of a team. If you think that, you know, 80% of the time, most people, let's say 70-80% of the time, we're spending a lot of the time on fixing stuff, you know, making sure something isn't broken. If you flipped that, you know, so that 70-80% of the time you're working on where you're brilliant, like, the results absolutely change.
Yeah, I think the flipping, and that word really sums it up. It's always giving people the opportunity to express fears, to highlight whatever threats they see, but always with the intent to flip it. And what do we do about it? What can we do about it? What are the ability? And I think that's it. You have to always give people the time and the space to share what the fears and concerns are, but with that intention of flipping. I think that an organization that is really tuned in to its people's strengths, and there's a common language around strengths, it isn't just at the leadership level, but it's embedded at all levels, that understanding. I think that there has to be much higher engagement. There has to be far more opportunities for learning, development, advancement, because that focus is all about on polishing those diamonds and how do we get you better and how do we get you better. Team-based, I think that there is far less potential for disagreements, for frustrations, when we understand our colleagues better. And it isn't just about their strengths, their blind spots. It's their weaknesses, the areas they're just not naturally strong. So they're not being an asshole. It's not an area they're strong in.
We did this with the team. We looked at the areas that we, we're good at, and we looked at the areas where we need more support. We looked at the areas where, we love to work, and that piece around, like, I don't know if it's vulnerability or it's just being more open around where you need support was so powerful, because it's something like, you do it on a transactional basis, but when you're actually looking really deep inside and taking that moment to really examine where am I really truly at my best, where do I absolutely love to work, what comes naturally to me, what's the bit within our team where I always want this bit of the work, whatever it is, maybe to question deeply, or maybe to do some more research, or whatever it is. And that piece around the support and where you're not performing at your best was a really powerful piece, because everyone started to see how they could support each other and how they could help each other in a way that probably frustrated the team in the past, frankly. So they would have seen this in someone, they would have recognized it, but because it was never expressly said, it was exactly what you're saying. It was nearly seen as arsehole behavior. It was like, they're just not even bothering, like, to fix this thing. Whereas when they said, and when I said as well, I really struggle with this, I actually shut down. I just really struggle, and I'd love some support in this area, or I would love that if you did this, then I would be able to. And it was just game changing. Like, it was absolutely game changing.
I think, to be quite explicit, Michelle, we're happier, we're more fulfilled. It's not just about ticking that box and getting better at stuff, that we're literally happier people when we are committed to being strengths focused and keeping that focus and being intentional and finding a way to make them come to life. How does this align with the overall message? It's about a new way of working, and that workplaces that embrace this are much more progressive. There's much higher engagement. Need to do the research on it, but I would imagine that they have a much more successful learning and development